She was an ordinary woman like so many others of her time. She had no fame, no title, and her name, well, no one knows. The Bible never told us. But even without a name, she went down in history. And it was no accident. She was born at a time when men worshipped the sky, the earth, and everything that shone between them. In the city of Ur, where it all began, the gods had tall temples and small hearts. There, amid the sounds of the markets and prayers spoken in ancient tongues, she grew up. She was the daughter of a people accustomed to stone idols and traditions that passed down through generations like invisible heirlooms. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. If this content touches your heart and you want to support us, feel free to click on the Thanks a Lot button. All help is welcome and makes a big difference. It was there in that setting that she met Lot, a practical, loyal man, nephew of a man named Abraham. And when Lot left with Abraham, guided by an invisible God who spoke of distant promises and unknown lands, she went with him, not out of faith, at least not hers, but out of love. Or maybe out of habit. Who knows? She didn't know she was embarking on a journey that would change everything. She only knew that she was leaving behind what she knew. Mud houses, dusty streets, metal gods. Now it was the road, wind in her face, endless sky, and a God she couldn't see, but who demanded everything. Life in tents was not easy. The ground was hard, food was scarce, and yet they walked on. Where Abraham went, Lot went, and where Lot went, she went too. It was like this until the day the shepherds started fighting. Too much cattle, too little land. And in that moment of tension, separation came. Lot had to choose where to go. And the place that caught his eye was a beautiful city, fertile, full of life, a city called Sodom. She didn't know it yet, but that choice would change the course of her history. It was there, in the middle of the field, at the fork in the road, that everything began to change. Lot looked around, analyzing the land like a man who calculates the future with his eyes. On one side, mountains and dry land. On the other, a green plain, cut by rivers that seemed to dance with the wind. It was the land of Sodom, beautiful, alive, promising. It looked like Eden in the midst of the earth. The choice was quick. For a practical man, it was a matter of logic. Water, pasture, city. And for her, Lot's wife, that choice was almost a relief. No more walking through the desert. No more sleeping under stars that don't warm you. Now, a real home. A roof, walls, neighbors, routine. The first view of the city was breathtaking. Stone towers, busy streets, different smells, people coming from all corners. There was music, markets, colorful fabrics, and sweet perfumes. Nothing there resembled the silent tents of the past. It was like entering a new world, and she liked it. She settled in quickly. She learned to bargain, to receive visitors, to live at that pace where the days passed quickly and her eyes were filled with beautiful things. But not all that glitters is gold. The neighbors had a strange way of living. They spoke loudly, mocked everything, laughed at sacred things as if they were jokes. She noticed, of course, but she pretended not to see. It was easier that way. After all, who wants to ruin a good life because of a few oddities? Days turned into months, months turned into years. The house was always full. Her daughters were growing up, and the past. Back there, dusty in her memory. Until the day two strangers arrived in town with steady eyes and sharp words. They weren't there for sightseeing. They came with a message, and it was the kind of message no one wanted to hear. Sodom had a different glow. It was the kind of place that mesmerizes. The streets were full of life. Commerce was booming. Smells invaded the air like an invisible dance. Spices, incense, sweet wine. There was always a party going on somewhere, and the people, they never seemed to sleep. Lot's wife dove headfirst into this new reality. Finally, a place where she could feel part of something bigger. She took more care with her appearance, chose her clothes with taste, frequented the market as if she were on a catwalk, and she was noticed. Sodom was freedom, or at least it seemed that way. No one there asked whether God approved or not. Everyone did whatever they wanted, and to be honest, she even liked it. After so long living in Lot's shadow, she now had a voice. She had a routine. She had friends who knew everything, and then some. She heard exaggerated stories on street corners, and although she knew some of them were over the top, she turned a blind eye. After all, no one wants to be the boring one who ruins the mood. But there was a hidden tension in the air. Sometimes the city seemed too quiet after sunset, as if the ground knew something no one else knew. Lot's wife felt from time to time a discomfort that was difficult to explain. A chill when she heard loud laughter, a discomfort in her stomach when she saw children repeating things they didn't even understand. She tried to ignore it. She didn't want any trouble. She already had stability, comfort, a good life. Lot seemed more restless. Sometimes he would return from the city gate with a heavy look on his face, as if he were carrying a secret. Then, on a muggy afternoon, 2 men arrived. They were unlike anything she had ever seen before. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't smile. Their eyes carried the weight of judgment. They hadn't come to negotiate. They had come to warn her. That night, something in the sky seemed out of place. The air was thick and stifling, as if the world were holding its breath. The 2 men who had arrived with Lot were not just anyone. They had a firm manner, like men carrying orders and accepting no questions. Lot's wife watched them from afar, half suspicious, half curious. They did not smile. They did not talk idly. They only whispered to Lot, and he, growing paler by the minute, only shook his head. It was after sunset that everything turned to chaos. A group of men from the city appeared in front of Lot's house, shouting and banging on the doors. They wanted to see the strangers and demanded that they come out. It was a scandal. A hungry crowd with red eyes and mouths full of malice. Lot's wife watched with her heart in her throat. She had never seen Sodom like this before. It was as if the entire city had gone mad. The 2 men then revealed who they were. They didn't need to say much. A single gesture was enough, and the gate closed as if by 1,000 invisible hands. And that's when she understood. These were no ordinary men. They were angels, and they were there at God's command. They spoke to Lot directly, without beating around the bush. The city was doomed. Evil had reached a point of no return. God was going to destroy everything. Not a stone would be left standing. He had to leave. Now, with his wife, with his daughters, with anyone else who wanted to live. Lot's wife froze. What did he mean, leave? Just like that? Abandon their home, clothes, memories, friends? Abandon their entire life because of a prophecy? It couldn't be true, and yet they began to pack in a hurry, with the noise outside growing louder and louder. It was in this rush that the angels gave a simple but heavy order. Run. Don't look back. Dawn had not yet broken when they were pulled out of their homes. Literally. The angels grabbed Lot by the hand, then his daughters, and finally her, half reluctant, half confused. There was no time to think. It was as if the world was about to collapse, and time had finally lost its patience. They ran through the streets of Sodom, while the silence seemed to scream in their ears. There was no more music, no lights in the windows. The city, once so full of noise and vanity, was now just darkness and dust, and yet her mind was still there. In the new dress she left in the closet, in the ceramic pots she had bought at the market, in the friend who knew nothing, in everything she was leaving behind. The angel's command echoed, "Don't look back." Simple to understand, difficult to obey, because it wasn't just a glance. It was everything that glance carried. It was attachment, habit, longing. It was the fear of losing what she knew, even though she knew it was already lost. Her hands were sweating, her heart was beating in time with her footsteps. Her daughters ran silently. Lot tried to stay calm, but his eyes already announced the end. And her. She kept going, half her body ahead, half her heart still behind, as if the past were pulling her soul back, inch by inch. The sky began to change. A strange, reddish light appeared on the horizon. It wasn't the sunrise. It was something else, something that burned even before it touched the skin. The ground shook slightly like a warning, a sign that the time to choose was over. And yet she hesitated. Her throat felt dry. Her feet felt heavy. And then came the sound. The sound came like muffled thunder, but without rain. A noise that seemed to come from the bowels of the earth. It was as if the ground itself was screaming in pain. She stopped for a moment, her heart racing, trying to understand what was happening behind her. The ground vibrated slightly beneath her feet, and the air grew hotter, heavier, smelling of sulfur and smoke. Suddenly the sky lit up. It wasn't sunlight, it was a fierce orange glow that painted everything in shades of doom. A flash that grew with every second, swallowing the night with teeth of fire. The silence turned to screams, but there were no words, only the sound of the world breaking. Her hands trembled, her body kept walking, but her head was back there in the square, in the smells, in the voices, in the laughter of her neighbors, in the house she had decorated with such care. The past was calling, like an insistent whisper. And then, in a gesture that seemed small, quick, almost without thinking, she turned her face away. It was like crossing an invisible line. Time stopped. The wind ceased. A frozen moment between what was and what would never be again. Her gaze met the city for the last time, but it was no longer Sodom. It was a burning abyss, a shapeless nightmare, a memory being swallowed alive. And in that same second, everything in her stopped. Her body stiffened, her skin dried up. The air disappeared from her lungs. She turned to salt, pure salt, cold, dry, static. She didn't fall, she didn't scream, she didn't break. She just stood there, as if time had carved an eternal warning into her. Behind her, the city burned. Ahead, her family continued on, unaware of what had happened. And there she was, in the middle of the road, between what had passed and what would never return. She didn't fall. She didn't scream. She didn't say goodbye. She just turned into a statue of salt, stuck to the ground as a living reminder of a simple but fatal mistake. She stayed there, with her back to the future, facing the past, at the exact point where the desire to return spoke louder than the order to move on. The wind blew, but it didn't carry her away. Dust danced around her, but she didn't move. Time passed, and she remained there as if she were part of the landscape, a lonely figure in the middle of nowhere, carrying the choice she made on her own body. It wasn't just punishment, it was a consequence. It wasn't just divine punishment, it was a reminder, a symbol, an echo of everything that was left behind. Those who came after, travelers, shepherds, foreigners, lost on the desert trails, sometimes said they saw, in the distance, the shape of a woman, hard, lonely, faceless. Just the outline, standing still, staring eternally to the south. They said the salt glistened when the sun hit it right, as if it were petrified tears. The eldest daughter was the first to notice her mother's absence. She looked back, but saw nothing. Only smoke on the horizon and a heat that made her eyes burn. Lord didn't say a word. He moved on with his fists clenched and his head down, as if he already knew, because inside him something had died along with her. Not love, perhaps, but the hope of going back to the way things were before. His daughters didn't understand at first. Only later, when the smell of burning disappeared and the silence became unbearable, did they realize the weight of her absence. They had their father, they had their lives, but they no longer had their mother. And with her, they also left behind secrets that no one else could tell. There was still a path ahead, and the cave in the mountains would be just the beginning of what was to come. Lot's wife stayed there halfway between Sodom and the new destination, a lonely statue of salt, hard as stone, but made of what had once given meaning to her life. A body standing between two worlds, the past that burned and the future that ran away from her. Many passed by that spot, and there was no shortage of stories. Some said that from a distance you could see the outline of a woman with her arms hanging down, as if she had given up holding on to anything. Others swore that at dusk the glare of the salt reflected the setting sun, as if she was still crying. And there were those who said nothing, just avoided the place. What happened there was not just a scene, it was a warning. Lot and his daughters moved on. They didn't look back, but the silence hurt. The wife, the mother, the woman who shared the tent, who organized meals, who asked questions on cold nights, was no longer there. And even without words, her absence filled everything. With every step, her memory was present, not in what was said, but in what would never be said again. The image of the statue remained, not only in the desert, but in the memory of those who heard the story, because it did not turn to dust, nor was it forgotten. It remained standing, like a silent reminder. Time passed, cities changed, but the question continued to echo among travelers. Why did she look back? Perhaps because deep down she thought she could still go back. Perhaps because the past seemed safer than the unknown. No one knows. What we do know is that salt does not lie. It preserves what it touches. And there, in that silent statue, the exact moment when her heart could not go on was preserved. Meanwhile, Lot's daughters, in a makeshift shelter among cold rocks, looked at their father with eyes full of doubt. The cave was dark, cold, surrounded by silence. That was all that remained, a hole carved into the rock, far from everything, where Lot and his two daughters hid after the destruction. There was no city, no home, no familiar road. The smoke from Sodom could still be seen in the distance, like a shadow in the sky. And the emptiness inside them grew, along with the fear of what was to come. Lot's daughters, still young, carried fear and longing in their eyes. They had lost everything. Their home, stability, the smell of their mother's cooking, their daily routine. Now, all they had was their father and each other, but they didn't know what to do with so much silence. The days passed slowly, and with time came an idea, strange, dangerous, born of a mixture of desperation and survival instinct. If the world had ended, they thought, how would life go on? How would names continue? How would a people emerge if there was no one else? Their mother, if she were alive, might have known what to say. But she was just salt now, and her daughters were on their own. So they made a decision that is difficult to understand from today's perspective, but which, in that context, seemed like the only way out. They drugged their father with wine, and on separate nights they lay with him without him knowing. It was not out of malice. It was out of fear of disappearing, of the lineage ending there in that doorless cave. From that decision, two sons were born. The eldest, Moab, the youngest, Ben-Ami. And from these sons came two entire peoples, the Moabites and the Ammonites. Peoples who grew, spread, fought, built cities, and left their mark. It all began there, in the uncomfortable silence of a cave. Years passed. The peoples grew, like trees planted in hard ground. Moab and Ben-Ami became leaders of nations. And even though the world had been turned upside down since the days of Sodom, the roots of history remained alive, even if buried under layers of time. Back then, it all started with a woman who looked back, and even though no one knew her name, her gesture echoed. Much later, among the Moabites, Ruth was born. She was a different woman, strong and faithful. Someone who would also face the pain of loss, the uncertainty of the future, and the decision to move on. But unlike Lot's wife, Ruth looked ahead. She left her land, her people, her memories, and walked toward the unknown. Her story would intertwine with the lineage of David and later with that of Jesus. It's funny how stories intersect, how a mistake from the past can pave the way for redemption in the future. Lot's wife turned to salt. Ruth became hope. But both silently carry the same message. Every step matters. Every choice echoes. Even without a name, Lot's wife became a fixed point in the memory of time. When Jesus walked among the people centuries later, he did not forget her. Amidst so many teachings, he uttered a short, cutting phrase that seems small but carries enormous weight. Remember Lot's wife. And why remember her? Because she turned around, because she hesitated, because she wanted to go back, even when the sky was saying go. Because sometimes we hold on so tightly to what has been that we lose sight of what could be. But this is not just a story of tragedy. It is also a warning, a choice, an open path, because the salt remained there, motionless, but those who survived had to continue. Her image remained there, etched in history like a comma separating the before and after. She didn't move, she didn't speak, she didn't live what was to come, all because she looked back, not out of curiosity but out of attachment. And that's where the biggest lesson in this story lies. The danger of holding on to what is already over. Lot's wife was not a bad woman. She was an ordinary person, with feelings, memories, dreams. Her mistake was something we understand very well, the difficulty of letting go, of giving up control, of accepting that certain things don't come back. She carried Sodom in her heart. And when the city turned to ash, she couldn't turn the page. How many times do we do the same? We look back, stir up memories, try to relive something that no longer exists. We get stuck in old pains, places that no longer fit, people who are gone, by choice or by fate. We know we need to move on, but our hearts get stuck. Her story reminds us that there is a right time to run, to obey, to trust. There won't always be time to understand everything. Sometimes the order comes as it did to her. Leave now and don't look back. And in that moment, what saves us is not understanding. It's obeying. It's trusting that God sees what we cannot yet see. She stayed, but the story went on. And while many only remember the salt, the sky still speaks of choices, of letting go, of not turning around when something new is calling. Because the future requires free hands, not hands tied to the past. And if Jesus told us to remember her, it wasn't to point out her mistake. It was to prevent us from repeating it, so that when the fire comes, whatever it may be, we will have the courage to run and not look back. If you liked the story of Lot's wife and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, we will explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.